Fame has a way of lighting up a person's life, and casting shadows just as deep. In Hollywood and beyond, some stories rise so bright they feel untouchable, until suddenly they're gone, replaced by silence, confusion, and unanswered questions. These are the mysteries that refuse to fade, the cases that linger in the public imagination long after headlines dim. Because when a star dies under strange circumstances, the world doesn't just lose an icon, it gains a riddle. Tonight, we step into those shadows, tracing the final hours, hidden tensions, and haunting coincidences behind some of the most puzzling celebrity cases ever recorded. Stories that even decades later demand one thing: the truth that no one has been able to find. Natalie Wood had lived her entire life beneath the glow of Hollywood lights. A child star who grew into a celebrated actress, she carried the rare kind of fame that never truly dims. But behind the elegance and camera flashes, Natalie was known to be uneasy around deep water, a detail that would become chillingly significant. It was Thanksgiving weekend, 1981. Natalie, her husband, Robert Wagner, their friend actor Christopher Walken, and the yacht's captain set off aboard the Splendor near Catalina Island. What was meant to be a quiet escape became the setting of one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries. Counts from that night unravel like a frayed thread. There were drinks, raised voices, tension that simmered just below the surface. The exact spark remains lost, but everyone agrees the atmosphere grew heavy as the night deepened. Sometime after midnight, Natalie Wood disappeared. The timeline becomes foggy here, a mix of memory, contradiction, and silence. Wagner said he believed she had taken a dinghy out for a ride. Others questioned why she would do that alone, in the dark, fully dressed, with the water she feared surrounding her. The captain later claimed he heard an argument. Walken remained private, offering little more than the suggestion that Natalie and Wagner were struggling with jealousy and career pressures. Hours later, search boats found her body floating face down near the island's rocky shoreline. The dinghy was drifting nearby, its motor off, as though untouched. Bruises on her arms and legs raised more questions than answers, and the cold Pacific had already taken its toll, erasing whatever story the water might have held. The official ruling at the time called it an accident, a tragic drowning. But the details never fit neatly. Why would someone with her fear of water venture into a dinghy at night? Why did the accounts from that evening change over the years? What really happened in those final minutes before Natalie Wood vanished from the deck of the Splendor? More than 40 years later, investigators still describe the case as open. Because behind the glamour, the fame, and the smiling photographs, one truth remains unshaken. Natalie Wood didn't simply slip into the water. Something happened that night, something no one on that boat has ever fully revealed. By September of 1996, Tupac Shakur wasn't just a rapper, he was a cultural force. A poet with a fire in his voice, a man caught between fame and the streets he refused to forget. But in Las Vegas, on a warm late summer night, that rising flame was abruptly, violently extinguished. Tupac arrived in the city with Suge Knight, head of Death Row Records, to watch a heavyweight boxing match at the MGM Grand. The energy was electric, the crowd's thick, the cameras everywhere. But beneath that excitement, something darker was already moving. After the fight, a confrontation broke out in the MGM lobby. Tupac, Suge, and their entourage became involved in a scuffle with a known gang affiliate. Security footage would later show the clash, quick, chaotic, and filled with the kind of tension that doesn't just evaporate when people walk away. Hours later, Tupac climbed into Suge's BMW. They drove down the Las Vegas Strip, music loud, windows down, the city glowing around them. For a moment, it felt like any other night in the whirlwind of fame. But at 11:15 p.m., a white Cadillac pulled up on their right side at a red light. The silence between the cars lasted only seconds, for the gunfire shattered it. A burst of shots tore through the BMW. Tupac was hit multiple times, chest, arm, thigh, each wound a cruel reminder of the violence he had escaped so many times before. Suge managed to drive the damaged car toward safety, tires screeching, but the Cadillac vanished into the neon haze as quickly as it had appeared. Tupac fought for his life for 6 days in a Las Vegas hospital. Machines hummed, police waited for answers, and fans gathered outside in stunned silence. Then, on September 13th, he succumbed to his injuries. He was 25 years old. What followed was not clarity, but a storm of theories. Some pointed to gang retaliation, tracing the conflict back to the MGM altercation. Others insisted it was connected to East-West Coast tensions, a feud that had spiraled far beyond music. There were whispers of betrayals within the industry, claims of undercover alliances, and suspicions reaching as high as the record labels themselves. Despite witnesses, cameras, and crowds everywhere that night, no one was ever charged. The white Cadillac was never officially linked to a suspect, and key individuals refused to cooperate or disappeared entirely. Over the years, the theories have only grown louder. A setup? A warning? A conspiracy buried under fear and silence? What is certain is this: Tupac's death didn't just take an artist. It shifted the ground beneath hip-hop forever. And decades later, the question that haunted Las Vegas that night still lingers in the air. Who pulled the trigger? And why has the truth never surfaced? By the summer of 1962, Marilyn Monroe was more than a Hollywood icon. She was a symbol of beauty, desire, and fragility, wrapped in one shimmering figure. But behind the camera flashes and breathless headlines, Marilyn was struggling. Depression, insomnia, and an industry that consumed its brightest stars had begun to take a toll she could no longer hide. On the night of August 4th, Marilyn was alone inside her Brentwood home. The house was quiet, the curtains drawn, the world outside unaware that history was shifting in the shadows of her bedroom. She made several phone calls that day, some filled with anxiety, others strangely calm. One friend said Marilyn sounded hopeful about her future. Another claimed she was distraught. The contradictions would become a theme that never fully faded. Just after midnight, her housekeeper reported that Marilyn's bedroom light hadn't turned off for hours. She said the door was locked, that she felt something was wrong. When the door was finally forced open, Marilyn Monroe was found lifeless on her bed, a telephone in her hand, an empty bottle of pills nearby. The official ruling was probable suicide. Hollywood mourned, tabloids circled, and the world accepted the tragedy, at least at first. But the timeline of that night began to shift with every retelling. Why did several witnesses give conflicting accounts of when Marilyn was last seen alive? Why were some phone records missing? And why did neighbors claim they saw unusual activity at her home earlier than authorities reported? Rumors grew quickly, whispers of political entanglements, powerful men, and secrets too dangerous to speak out loud. Some claimed Marilyn was silenced to protect reputations. Others believed she was the victim of an accidental overdose covered up to preserve Hollywood's image. And then there were those who insisted the evidence simply didn't match the story the public was told. Her autopsy revealed abnormalities, bruising that didn't fit the official explanation, and inconsistencies that fed theories for decades. Was she intoxicated enough to take the pills on her own? Why was her room allegedly cleaned before investigators arrived? And who were the unnamed figures some neighbors claimed they saw near her house that night? More than 60 years later, the mystery remains sealed behind a door no one has fully dared to open. Accident, suicide, or something darker. Marilyn Monroe left the world with a final performance no one witnessed, only its aftermath. And in that silence one truth lingers. The brighter the star, the deeper the shadows that try to hide its fall. By the mid-1970s, Bob Crane was no longer just the beloved star of Hogan's Heroes. He had become a man living two very different lives. On screen, he was charismatic, quick-witted, the kind of performer audiences trusted instantly. But off camera, Crane's world was darker, tangled in compulsions, secret tapes, and friendships that blurred into something far more dangerous. Crane had developed a habit of filming his private encounters. He recorded everything: partners, nights out, the smallest details of a double life he kept hidden from the Hollywood spotlight. And through that obsession, he became close to John Henry Carpenter, a video equipment salesman who shared his fascination with recording technology. Their bond was strange, intense, and eventually toxic. On June 29, 1978, Bob Crane was spending time in Scottsdale, Arizona, performing in a stage play. He was in a transitional moment, trying to step away from old habits, distancing himself from Carpenter, and focusing on rebuilding his career. But whatever peace he was searching for ended abruptly in a quiet apartment, sometime before dawn. When Crane failed to appear for a lunch appointment the next day, a co-star went to check on him. Inside, she found a scene that would haunt investigators for years. Bob Crane lay motionless on his bed, bludgeoned to death by an unknown weapon. Blood splattered the room, shadows clung to every corner, and yet nothing seemed stolen. No forced entry, no sign of a struggle outside the fatal blows. It was as if someone had walked in with a purpose, and walked out just as easily. Detectives quickly honed in on Carpenter. The friendship had recently soured. Crane had told friends he wanted to cut ties. Carpenter's rental car even contained a smear of blood. But in 1978, DNA testing didn't exist, and investigators couldn't prove it belonged to Crane. The case stalled, whispers turned into headlines, and theories multiplied. Years later, when DNA science finally progressed, prosecutors attempted to reopen the case. They believed they finally had enough to tie Carpenter to the murder, but the evidence was too degraded, too incomplete. In 1994, the trial ended with a verdict that echoed national frustration. Not guilty, maintaining his innocence until his death. And with that, the last clear suspect disappeared forever. Decades later, the murder weapon has never been found. No fingerprints, no confession, no solid motive, beyond a friendship fractured in the shadows of obsession. Bob Crane's final chapter reads like the roles he never got to play, dark, confusing, and unfinished. A man who lived his life on camera, undone by a mystery that remains forever off screen. Brittany Murphy was Hollywood's bright, infectious energy, a young actress whose laughter and charm seemed to fill every room. From Clueless to 8 Mile, she was a rising star with a magnetic presence, one that made it easy to forget she was still just in her 20s. But fame often masks fragility, and behind the smiles there were cracks few could see. On December 20th, 2009, Murphy suddenly collapsed in her Los Angeles home. Paramedics arrived quickly, but despite their efforts, she was pronounced dead at the age of 32. The official cause was listed as pneumonia, complicated by iron deficiency anemia, with several prescription and over-the-counter medications in her system. But the story didn't end there. It only grew murkier. Toxicology reports seemed contradictory, leaving more questions than answers. How could someone so young die so suddenly from conditions typically considered treatable? Friends and family claimed she had been healthy, active, and working on new projects. Her husband, Simon Monjack, was the one who found her, a figure who would later become a central character in the swirling mystery of her death. Circumstances surrounding him were unusual, including his own mysterious death just 5 months later, which added fuel to the growing speculation. Investigators and experts debated endlessly. Was this a tragic combination of medical factors, or was something more sinister at play? Conspiracy theories spread quickly, claims of poisoning, environmental toxins, and even foul play connected to those around her. Yet no definitive evidence ever emerged to substantiate them. And so, Brittany Murphy's story ended not with resolution, but with doubt. A vibrant life extinguished far too soon, leaving behind fans and friends who could not reconcile the suddenness of her death. Her name remains etched in Hollywood's collective memory, a bright star swallowed too early, a life that asks one haunting question. What really happened behind closed doors that night in her Los Angeles home? What ties these celebrity tragedies together, Ice&T? Just the glamour, or the fame? It sets the shadows that fame casts. High-profile lives attract more than admiration. They attract scrutiny, interference, and sometimes deception. Evidence is often lost, destroyed, or hidden in plain sight. Witnesses contradict themselves, pressured by lawyers, media, or fear of reprisal. In each case, the world wanted answers, but the very attention that made these lives bright also obscured the truth. Headlines rushed in before investigations were complete. Rumors replaced facts. And in the quiet aftermath, the questions remained unanswered. For Natalie Wood, Tupac Shakur, Marilyn Monroe, Bob Crane, and Brittany Murphy, fame became both a shield and a barrier. It ensured the world would never forget them. And yet, paradoxically, it may have ensured the truth about their final hours would remain forever out of reach. These stories endure not because they are simple, but because the forces surrounding them, power, secrecy, and the weight of celebrity have made them nearly impossible to solve. As we step back from these stories, one thought lingers in the mind like a whisper in the dark. Are these tragedies merely the result of chance, of human error, of unfortunate timing? Or do they hint at something deeper, forces, decisions, or secrets that the world was never meant to uncover? In the lives of Natalie Wood, Tupac Shakur, Marilyn Monroe, Bob Crane, and Brittany Murphy, the bright lights of fame illuminated more than just talent. They cast shadows that hide inconsistencies, unanswered questions, and mysteries that refuse to die. Perhaps the truth exists somewhere, just out of reach. Or perhaps some stories are destined to remain unsolved. Their final chapters written only in speculation, rumor, and the lingering echoes of lives taken too soon. And in that silence, the question remains, what really happened? And will we ever know? Thank you for joining us as we explored some of the most haunting celebrity mysteries that the world may never fully understand. If you want to uncover more unsolved cases, hidden truths, and the shadows lurking behind fame, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. In our next episode, we'll dive into another chilling unsolved story from the USA, a case that shocked a small town and left investigators baffled for decades. The mysteries don't end here, and neither does the search for the truth.